The advertisement had said clean rooms, fair prices, all species welcome. But Tom wasn't so sure about that last part as he stood in front of the towering apartment complex on Station Beta 7. The building's entrance was clearly designed for beings much taller than the average human, and the door scanner was placed at what would be eye level for a 7-foot-tall person. Tom stretched up on his tiptoes, waving his rental agreement at the scanner. After 3 attempts and 1 small jump, the door finally beeped and slid open with a soft hiss. He grabbed his 2 bags and walked inside, immediately noticing how warm and dry the air felt compared to the station's main corridors. "You are late by 47 seconds, a voice called from above. Tom looked up to see a tall, azure-skinned figure descending a gravity-defying spiral staircase. Her skin had a subtle pattern that reminded him of sand dunes, and her eyes were large and golden, with vertical pupils like a cat's. "I am Ms. Blue, the property manager. You must be the human." "Yes, that's me." "Tom. Sorry about being late. I had trouble with the scanner," he explained, trying not to stare at how her feet seemed to glide just slightly above the floor. Ms. Blue's expression shifted in a way Tom couldn't quite read. "Ah, yes. I will adjust it to accommodate your compact stature." She pulled out a datapad that was almost as big as Tom's torso. "Now we must review the building rules. Rule number 1. No moisture-based cooking without proper ventilation." "Moisture-based cooking?" Tom asked. "Yes. Boiling, steaming, that sort of thing. Most of our residents come from desert worlds, and excess humidity can be quite distressing for them." She looked him up and down. "You humans are unusually moist creatures, aren't you?" Tom fought back a laugh. "We're mostly water, yes." Ms. Blue's golden eyes widened slightly. "Fascinating. And disturbing. Rule number 2. All residents must maintain a cleanliness rating of at least 95% during weekly inspections." As she continued listing rules, Tom noticed other residents peeking out from their apartments. Most of them had similar desert-adapted features: scales, protective eye membranes, or exoskeletons designed to prevent water loss. A few quickly closed their doors when they saw him looking. Rule 17. No pets that secrete, spray, or otherwise disperse liquids. Ms. Blue continued. Rule 18. All biological waste must be properly dehydrated before disposal. Tom nodded along, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The rent was remarkably cheap for Station Beta 7, but now he was starting to understand why. He was probably the first human to ever live in this building. And finally, Rule 34. All residents must participate in the monthly community gathering, where we share dried snacks and discuss building maintenance issues. Ms. Blue finished her list and looked at Tom expectantly. "Do you understand and agree to all conditions?" "Yes, I think so," Tom said, trying to remember even half of what she just told him. "Excellent." Ms. Blue's face did something that might have been a smile. "Your unit is on level 3, number 307. The gravity is set to standard station levels, but I can adjust it if you find it uncomfortable. Most of our residents prefer about 1.3 times that, but given your species' bone density." She trailed off as a tall, chitinous resident walked past them, turning all 4 of its eye stalks to stare at Tom. The resident made a clicking sound that might have been a greeting or possibly a warning. "Don't mind Mr. Green," Ms. Blue said. "He's just never seen a human up close before. None of us have, actually. You're quite the novelty." Tom smiled nervously. "I'll try not to disappoint." "See that you don't." Ms. Blue handed him an access card. "Welcome to Desert Comfort Apartments. Remember, inspections are every Thursday at 800 hours sharp. And please," she hesitated, "try to contain your moisture." As Tom headed up to his new apartment, he could hear Ms. Blue muttering into her datapad, adding a new rule about acceptable humidity levels in common areas. This was either going to be the best or worst housing decision of his life. At least it would be interesting. 2 weeks into living at Desert Comfort Apartments, Tom was starting to get used to the strange looks. He'd learned to time his showers for when most residents were sleeping, and he kept a small dehumidifier running constantly to avoid complaints about his human vapor emissions. That morning, as he made his breakfast, a knock on his door made him jump. He opened it to find Ms. Blue holding her ever-present datapad and wearing what looked like a moisture protection suit. "Good morning, Tom. Time for your first cultural exchange session," she announced, stepping inside while carefully maintaining a 3-foot distance. "As the first human in our building, we believe it's important to understand your unique habits." Tom quickly turned off his coffee maker, remembering the building's strict rules about steam. "Sure, what would you like to know?" "First," Ms. Blue said, her golden eyes fixed on his face, "please explain why your skin becomes shiny during the day. Mr. Green is concerned you might be slowly melting." "Oh, that's just sweat," Tom explained. "It's how humans regulate their temperature." Ms. Blue's pupils narrowed to thin slits. "You mean you deliberately leak water through your skin?" She made a note on her datapad, muttering something that sounded like horrifying yet fascinating. Before Tom could explain further, another resident appeared at his open door. It was Mrs. Purple, an elderly alien whose scaled skin resembled polished amethyst. She often sat in the lobby, warning new residents about the dangers of excessive humidity. "Is it true?" Mrs. Purple asked, her head frills extending in excitement. "Does the human really extract moisture from its body?" Tom soon found himself giving an impromptu biology lesson to a growing crowd of desert-dwelling aliens. They gathered in his doorway, maintaining what they considered a safe distance from his moisture field. "And these sweat glands, they're all over your body?" Ms. Blue asked, now thoroughly invested in the discussion. "How do you prevent total fluid loss?" "Well, we drink water to replace it," Tom explained. The crowd gasped in unified horror. Mr. Green's eye stalks retracted slightly, and Mrs. Purple had to lean against the wall. "You mean you constantly cycle water through your body?" Ms. Blue's voice had risen an octave. Voluntarily, Tom decided it was probably best not to mention crying or sneezing just yet. "It's perfectly normal for humans," he assured them. "We evolved on a planet with lots of water." "How wonderfully primitive," Mrs. Purple said, in what she probably thought was a compliment. "Like the ancient mud-dwelling ancestors in our history texts." Ms. Blue was furiously updating her datapad. "We'll need to install moisture barriers in the hallway, and perhaps schedule your movement through common areas to minimize exposure to other residents." "I can just wear a jacket when I'm in the hallways," Tom offered. "You mean you can contain your emissions with simple fabric?" Ms. Blue looked skeptical. "Fascinating. We'll need to document this for future human tenants." The impromptu meeting was interrupted by a scream from down the hall. Everyone turned to see the building's maintenance worker, Mr. Brown, pointing at something on the floor. "A moisture trail," he shouted, his crystalline body glinting in distress. "It leads right to this unit." Tom looked down and realized he'd spilled a few drops of water while making coffee. Before he could explain, Ms. Blue had already implemented emergency protocols. "Everyone remain calm," she announced. "Return to your units while I update the building's safety guidelines. Tom, we'll need to discuss installation of liquid containment systems." As his neighbors hurried away, Tom couldn't help but smile. Ms. Blue stayed behind, still taking notes. "I must admit," she said, her voice lowered, "you're the most interesting tenant we've had since the silicon-based life form who kept accidentally melting the furniture. Would you be willing to participate in weekly documentation of human biological processes? As long as it doesn't involve any invasive tests." Tom agreed. "Excellent." Ms. Blue's face did that almost smile again. "And perhaps you could explain why your head keeps sprouting those thin protein filaments." "Mr. Green is convinced they're parasites." Tom reached up to touch his growing stubble. This was going to be an interesting conversation. After a month at Desert Comfort Apartments, Tom had developed a careful routine. He managed his workouts to coincide with the building's lowest occupancy times, minimizing contact with his moisture-fearing neighbors. His hair had grown longer too. Maintaining proper haircuts on station mid-7 was challenging since most beings didn't have any. One particular morning, Tom returned from his run feeling especially good. The station's artificial gravity had been slightly lower than usual, making his jog feel effortless. He'd let his dark hair grow past his shoulders now, keeping it tied back in a ponytail during exercise. As he stepped out of the shower, he heard the building's inspection alert chime. Tom quickly wrapped a towel around his waist, expecting Ms. Blue to pass by his unit as she usually did during her rounds. What he didn't expect was for his door to slide open immediately. Emergency inspection, Ms. Blue announced, striding in with her datavat. Mr. Brown detected unusual humidity spikes in this sector and she stopped mid-sentence, her golden eyes growing impossibly wide. Tom stood frozen, water still dripping from his hair. His long ponytail hung down his back, dark and wet from the shower. Ms. Blue's normally blue skin turned several shades paler. "By the sacred sands," she whispered. There's a creature attached to you." "What?" "No, that's just my—" Tom started to explain, but Ms. Blue had already backed against the wall, hitting every emergency button on her datavat. "Security Protocol Alpha. Security Protocol Alpha," she shouted into her communicator. "Code Desert Worm. I repeat, Code Desert Worm." "Ms. Blue, please calm down." "It's only my hair," Tom tried again, but the building's alert system had already activated, filling the corridors with a high-pitched warning tone. "Don't move," Ms. Blue commanded, her voice shaking. "The emergency response team will contain the situation. How long has this parasite been growing? Why didn't you report it during our biological process documentation sessions?" Tom could hear his neighbors panicking in the hallway. Mr. Green's clicking had reached a frequency that threatened to shatter glass, and Mrs. Purple was loudly reciting ancient desert prayers. "It's my hair," Tom finally managed to shout over the chaos. "It's just wet from the shower." But Ms. Blue wasn't listening. She was too busy reading from her emergency protocols datavat. In the event of discovering a Shai-Hulud class organism, remain calm and contact the nearest sand priest for ritual cleansing. The situation got even more complicated when the building's emergency response team arrived. They were wearing what looked like ancient spacesuits and carrying various tools that Tom hoped weren't meant for specimen collection. "Pleased," Tom said, clutching his towel with one hand and holding the other up in a peaceful gesture. "I can explain everything. This is a normal human feature. Remember how we talked about the protein filaments growing from my head? Those were tiny bristles," Ms. Blue countered, now safely behind the response team. "This is clearly a desert worm symbiote. I've seen the ancient texts they used to bond with our ancestors during the Great Sand Wars." "Look," Tom said, reaching back and undoing his ponytail. His wet hair fell loose around his shoulders, causing several of the response team members to step back in alarm. "It's spreading," someone shrieked from the hallway. "Actually, it's demonstrating normal hair behavior," Tom explained, trying to sound as scientific as possible. "All humans have it. It grows from our scalp, and we can style it different ways. Like this." He quickly gathered his hair back into a ponytail, then let it down again. The response team lowered their tools slightly, fascinated despite their fear. Ms. Blue had stopped calling for ritual cleansing and was now frantically updating her notes. "You mean to tell me," she said slowly, "that humans naturally grow these fibrous appendages, and they're not parasitic desert dwellers?" "Exactly." Tom nodded, relieved to finally be getting through. "It's completely normal. Some humans even grow them longer than this." There was a thud in the hallway as Mrs. Purple fainted at this revelation. Mr. Green's eye stalks had extended to their full length, all four of them fixed on Tom's hair with a mixture of horror and fascination. Ms. Blue's fingers flew over her datapad. "We'll need to update all the tenant documentation." Add a new section on human appendage variations. Schedule an emergency building meeting. She paused, looking at Tom with what might have been embarrassment. And perhaps we should continue this discussion after you've had a chance to get dressed. The building's community room had never been so crowded. Every resident of Desert Comfort Apartments had shown up for the emergency meeting, though they all clustered at the far end of the room, leaving a wide empty space around Tom. Ms. Blue stood at the front, her datapad connected to the room's main display screen. "Thank you all for coming to this urgent tenant information session," she began, her voice still slightly shaky from the morning's events. "As you may have heard, we had a situation regarding our human residents' previously undocumented appendages." Tom sat in his chair, hair now completely dry and neatly tied back, trying not to feel like a specimen under examination. Mr. Green's eye stalks hadn't stopped tracking his every movement since he entered the room. "I have prepared a presentation," Ms. Blue continued, bringing up a series of images on the screen. "After extensive research in the station's xenobiology database, I can confirm that these fibrous growths are indeed a natural human feature called hair." The crowd murmured nervously. Mrs. Purple, who had recovered from her earlier fainting spell, clutched her ceremonial sand crystals tightly. "Tom has agreed to provide a demonstration," Ms. Blue announced. "Remember, there is no cause for alarm. The building's humidity shields are at maximum power." Tom stood up, feeling oddly like he was about to perform a magic trick. "As I mentioned earlier, this is completely normal for humans. It grows from our scalp end." "Does it hurt?" interrupted Mr. Brown, his crystalline form glinting with anxiety. "When it extends from your dermal layer?" "No, not at all," Tom assured him. "It's like your scales or crystals, just a natural part of our biology." Ms. Blue advanced to the next slide, which showed various human hairstyles she'd found in the database. Several residents gasped at the image of someone with dreadlocks. "As you can see," she explained, "humans can manipulate these protein strands into different configurations. Some even apply artificial colorants to them." "But why?" asked a small, gecko-like resident Tom hadn't met yet. "What purpose does it serve?" "Well," Tom started, "originally, it helped keep our ancestors warm and protected from the sun. Now it's mostly just part of how we look. Some humans even remove it completely." This caused another stir in the crowd. The idea that humans could willingly detach their hair seemed to both horrify and fascinate them. "Tom has agreed to provide a small sample for our biology archives," Ms. Blue announced. She approached him cautiously, holding what looked like a specimen container designed for handling hazardous materials. Tom reached up and plucked a single hair from its head, placing it in the container. The crowd pressed forward, curiosity temporarily overcoming their fear of moisture. "Notice the flexibility," Ms. Blue said, manipulating the container to make the hair bend. "And yet it maintains structural integrity even when separated from the host." Mr. Green raised one of his eye stalks. "But this morning, you said it looked like a desert worm. How did you reach that conclusion?" "Ah." Ms. Blue's skin darkened slightly in what Tom had learned was their version of a blush. "When wet, these fibers can cluster together, creating an appearance similar to ancient sand-dwelling creatures. However, I assure you that after thorough scanning, there is no risk of it burrowing into the building's foundation." An elderly resident in the back raised a trembling appendage. "Does this mean? Are there other humans with even more of these growths?" "Actually," Tom said, deciding they might as well learn everything at once, "most humans have hair in other places too, just usually shorter." He was cut off by the sound of Mrs. Purple hitting the floor again. This time, 3 other residents joined her in unconsciousness. Ms. Blue quickly stepped in. "Perhaps we should save the advanced biology lessons for another time. For now, let's focus on updating our building's grooming policies. I propose we install specialized ventilation systems in all bathrooms to prevent any future confusion about wet hair incidents." As the meeting continued, Tom noticed that despite their initial shock, many of his neighbors were now looking at him with something closer to amazement than fear. Mr. Green had even moved a few feet closer, his eye stalks focused on Tom's ponytail with scholarly interest. One final note, Ms. Blue concluded, starting tomorrow, we will begin weekly educational sessions on human biological features. Attendance is mandatory. Moisture protection suits will be provided. Over the next week, Tom barely saw Ms. Blue around the building. Instead of her usual rounds, she had delegated inspection duties to Mr. Brown, while she devoted herself to what she called critical xenobiological research. The only sign of her presence was the steady stream of delivery drones bringing more datapads to her office. When she finally emerged, her usually pristine azure skin had a slightly paler tint, and her golden eyes were surrounded by dark circles that suggested she hadn't rested in days. She cornered Tom in the lobby one morning, clutching a stack of datapads. "Did you know," she said without preamble, "that humans shed approximately 100 strands of hair every day?" Her eye twitched slightly. 100. Every day. "Well, yes," Tom replied carefully, "but they're very small. And that's not all." She activated one of her datapads, projecting a hologram of human anatomy. "Your species constantly sheds skin cells too. Millions of them. You're leaving microscopic parts of yourself everywhere you go." Several passing residents quickly pressed themselves against the far wall, trying to avoid Tom's supposed cloud of shed cells. Mr. Green extended his eye stalks from around a corner, clearly eavesdropping. "Ms. Blue," Tom said gently, "maybe you should take a break from the research." "Break? How can I take a break?" She frantically switched to another datapad. "Did you know about fingernails? They just keep growing. Forever. Like some sort of endless calcium production facility." "They don't actually grow after we," Tom started, but Ms. Blue was on a roll. "And eyelashes. Tiny protective fibers around your visual organs that occasionally detach and float through the air. The air we all breathe." She was practically vibrating now, her desert-born biology clearly struggling with these revelations. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, watching their normally composed landlady's unusual behavior with fascination. Mrs. Purple was taking notes, probably for her next community newsletter. "Look," Ms. Blue said, pulling out what appeared to be a hand-drawn chart. "I've mapped the potential spread of human biological matter throughout the building. According to my calculations, within one standard year, there could be traces of your shed materials in every single ventilation shaft." Tom noticed her calculations included several mathematical symbols he'd never seen before, and what looked like ancient desert prophecies in the margins. "The most disturbing part," she continued, now pacing in a small circle, "is that it's not just the hair. Everything about humans is in a constant state of renewal and replacement. Your entire outer layer regenerates every few weeks. You're like some sort of self-molting creature, but in slow motion." "That's actually a pretty good description," Tom admitted. Ms. Blue stopped pacing and stared at him. "You mean you knew? You knew all this and still chose to live in a building full of desert-evolved species?" "Well, when you put it that way." "This changes everything," she declared, straightening up to her full height. "We need to completely revise our human accommodation protocols, install new filtration systems, perhaps set up containment fields." She trailed off, muttering calculations under her breath. Just then, one of Tom's hairs, which had indeed shed naturally, drifted down in the still air of the lobby. The crowd watched in horror as it landed on Ms. Blue's datapad. She stared at it for a long moment. "Fascinating," she whispered, all signs of stress suddenly gone. She carefully picked up the hair with a specialized tool she'd apparently started carrying for just such an occasion. "The structure, the way it catches the light, it's actually quite elegant, isn't it?" The other residents leaned in slightly, their fear giving way to curiosity. Even Mr. Green had fully emerged from his corner, all four eye stalks focused on the hair. "Perhaps," Ms. Blue said thoughtfully, placing the hair in a specimen container, "we've been thinking about this all wrong. Instead of seeing human biology as a hazard to contain, We should view it as an opportunity to study an extraordinary example of biological diversity. She turned to Tom with what he now recognized as her version of excitement. Would you be willing to participate in a long-term documentation project? For science, of course, and proper building management. Tom looked at his neighbor's eager faces and sighed. As long as it doesn't involve any DNA samples. Oh no, Ms. Blue assured him, already tapping on her datapad. We'll start with something simple. Tell me, what exactly are these eyebrows I've been reading about? Word of Desert Comfort Apartments' unique human resident had spread throughout Station Beta 7, bringing unexpected attention to the previously quiet building. One morning, Tom found Ms. Blue confronting a group of other landlords in the lobby, her normally blue skin taking on a darker, more intimidating shade. Absolutely not, she was saying, her datapad clutched protectively to her chest. I will not share my research on human biology with the Landlords Association. That data is proprietary to Desert Comfort Apartments. The other property managers, a mix of crystalline and scaled beings, were clustered together in what Tom recognized as their version of aggressive posturing. The one in front, a tall being with metallic scales, stepped forward. Be reasonable, he said. You can't keep this information to yourself. What if more humans try to rent in our sector? We need to be prepared for their emissions. Ms. Blue drew herself up to her full height. My tenants' biological processes are none of your concern. Tom's moisture levels are well within acceptable parameters. Is that so? Another landlord chimed in. We've heard rumors about daily water rituals, and something about constantly growing appendages. Tom, who had been trying to quietly slip past, found himself suddenly pulled into the conversation as Ms. Blue gestured for him to join her. Indeed, she said proudly, Tom has been an exemplary tenant. His unique biological features have actually improved our building's diversity rating. Did you know humans can regulate their own temperature through a fascinating process called perspiration? The other landlords backed away slightly at this revelation, but Ms. Blue wasn't finished. And their protein filaments. She was warming to her subject now. They're not just random growths. They're highly organized structures capable of remarkable adaptability. Tom, show them the thing with the ponytail. Tom obligingly removed his hair tie and let his hair fall loose, then gathered it back up. The landlords watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. You see, Ms. Blue said triumphantly. Complete control over the appendages. No desert worms involved whatsoever. But the humidity readings in your building, the metallic scaled landlord protested. They must be off the charts. Actually, Ms. Blue pulled up a chart on her datapad. Since implementing our new human-adapted ventilation systems, our humidity levels have been lower than any other residential complex in the sector. Tom has been incredibly cooperative in adhering to our moisture management protocols. The other landlords huddled together, whispering and clicking in their native languages. Tom noticed Mr. Green watching from his usual corner, all four eye stalks radiating what looked like pride. Furthermore, Ms. Blue continued, now fully in her element, human biology has provided unexpected benefits to our community. Their constant cell regeneration process has inspired Mrs. Purple to start a meditation group about renewal and change. Mr. Brown has developed 3 new types of air filters based on studying human hair structure, and our monthly community meetings have never been better attended. Tom hadn't realized how much he'd influenced the building's culture. Even Mrs. Purple, who still carried her sand crystals for protection, had started greeting him with a friendly nod instead of a fearful shriek. The metallic-scaled landlord made one last attempt, but surely the other residents complain. About the shedding. Oh, please, Ms. Blue waved her hand dismissively. I've seen your maintenance reports. At least human hair doesn't corrode metal like some species' crystalline exfoliation. This caused several of the landlords to shift uncomfortably, their own biological processes suddenly under scrutiny. Now, Ms. Blue said firmly, unless you have actual building code violations to discuss, I suggest you return to your own properties. Some of us have real work to do. Tom and I are scheduled to document the fascinating process of what humans call beard growth this afternoon." As the other landlords shuffled away, Tom turned to Ms. Blue. "You didn't have to defend me like that." "Nonsense," she replied, already pulling up her research notes. "Desert Comfort Apartments maintains the highest standards in xenobiological accommodation." Besides, she added with what was definitely becoming a real smile, "I've invested far too much time in studying human biology to share my findings with those amateurs. Now about this beard documentation." Tom touched his stubbled chin and grinned. "Should I warn them about arm hair now, or should we save that for next month's meeting?" Ms. Blue's eyes widened with new curiosity. "There's more." 6 months after the infamous hair incident, Desert Comfort Apartments had changed dramatically. The lobby now featured a holographic display proudly announcing Station Beta 7's premier human-friendly residence, and a framed specimen of Tom's hair sat in a place of honor next to Ms. Blue's certificates. The morning started like any other, with Tom heading to the community room for his usual breakfast. The room had been modified with separate humidity-controlled sections, allowing humans and desert species to comfortably share the space. He found Ms. Blue already there, interviewing a potential new tenant. "As you can see," Ms. Blue was saying to a human woman with impressive dreadlocks, "our facilities are fully equipped for human biological processes. Each apartment has dedicated moisture management systems and specialized ventilation for hair maintenance." The woman looked around uncertainly. "And the other residents don't mind?" "Mind?" Ms. Blue pulled up her ever-present datapad. "We have extensive documentation on human desert species cohabitation. Our current human resident has been instrumental in developing our accommodation protocols. Tom, please come demonstrate the hair containment system we developed." Tom walked over, now well used to being exhibited as the building's pioneer human tenant. He pulled a sleeve back to show the small device on his wrist. It creates a localized field that prevents shed hair from floating around. Ms. Blue invented it after studying human hair patterns for 3 months. "Fascinating," the woman said, touching one of her own dreadlocks. "But what about washing hair? I've heard some buildings have strict water quotas." "Oh, we're well past such primitive restrictions," Ms. Blue declared proudly. "Our water recycling system is the most advanced in the sector. We even have specialized shower heads that Mr. Brown designed based on optimal human hair care requirements." She paused. "Though we did have to add some warning signs after the incident with the high-pressure setting." Mr. Green, who had become something of a human culture enthusiast, emerged from his corner. All 4 of his eye stalks were focused on the woman's dreadlocks with undisguised curiosity. "Are those permanent protein formations?" he asked, using the scientific terminology he picked up from Ms. Blue's weekly human biology seminars. "The structural engineering is remarkable." The woman blinked in surprise, then smiled. "They're dreadlocks. They take a lot of maintenance, but yes, they hold their shape." Ms. Blue was practically vibrating with excitement. "Would you be willing to participate in our ongoing human hair documentation project? We've never had the opportunity to study this particular configuration." In the background, Tom noticed Mrs. Purple leading her meditation group, their session apparently focused on embracing change through the wisdom of human regenerative processes. She had even started wearing a decorative scarf, inspired by human hair accessories. "The building has really evolved," Tom explained to the potential tenant. "When I first moved in, everyone thought my wet hair was a desert worm." Ms. Blue's skin darkened slightly. "That was before we developed our comprehensive guide to human features. Did you know we're now the only residential complex on Station Beta 7 with a dedicated human biology research center?" She gestured to what had once been a storage room, now converted into a small laboratory filled with charts, specimens, and what appeared to be a growing collection of human hair care products. "We've even started an exchange program with other buildings," Mr. Green added. "Last week, I gave a presentation on human temperature regulation mechanisms to the Crystalline Heights community." The woman looked around at the unusual scene. desert-dwelling aliens calmly coexisting with, and even studying, human biology. This is not what I expected. Desert Comfort Apartments prides itself on being at the forefront of interspecies accommodation, Ms. Blue said formally. Then she leaned in slightly. Though I should warn you, we do have mandatory weekly biology documentation sessions. Currently, we're studying something called split ends. Fascinating phenomenon. Tom watched as the woman signed her rental agreement, marking the beginning of a new chapter for the building. As Ms. Blue excitedly added more notes to her ever-growing research database, he caught sight of the framed document on her office wall, his original hair specimen, now labeled Specimen Number 1. The Great Misunderstanding, a historic moment in human desert species relations. Mr. Brown shuffled past, carrying his latest prototype for a humidity-controlled hairdryer. Mrs. Purple's meditation group had moved on to contemplating the spiritual significance of human nail growth, and Mr. Green was already extending his eye stalks for a closer look at their newest tenant's dreadlocks. Desert Comfort Apartments had found its niche, and somewhere along the way, they'd all learned that sometimes the strangest features could bring people together.